This is Anupam. Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and whenever you're watching. So, basically, this video series I'm trying to to make myself learn more about application modernization. This is the video series which I'm going to make every week or in 2 weeks once. This is my first week where I'm going to talk about how I'm going to take an approach for application modernization. I'll start with .NET to kickstart that. How do we take that journey? Again, when moving to the cloud, either being Azure or AWS or whatever the cloud we're talking about. So that journey we're going to take. Other than that, in this journey, I'm gonna talk about the application. If you have any suggestion how to start, where to start, what will be the best way, please feel free to comment. But I'm trying to take my own journey through the weeks. I will tell you that what I have studied during this week, what I have done during this week. It's like a double checkpoint. It give me a checkpoint for that I need to complete an X amount of work, as well as give me a responsibility that I need to finish my work as well, because I need to make some video out of it, right? So anyways, I will cut this chase very fast and don't talk much. So where am I now? I am actually trying to understand where should be the first starting point to do this application modernization. Where I see is that I can start this at a two place. So I started two different journey. First, studying about the programming languages. So I am starting with .NET. I'm trying to make a demo website. We'll talk about that more. Also, I'm studying about Azure multiple services. The first track is talking more about kind of a web services or an application we are talking about, which is a .NET. Within .NET, you have multiple framework, the traditional ASP.NET websites, or it is like a core, new core which they have .NET Core framework. Other than that, you also have multiple languages, C Sharp, Razor Pages, and there are many more, right? So we need to have an understanding how these websites are made and how these different sections are and controlled and managed. And then you need to understand how I'm going to map my Azure services. For example, right? So I have an website which is basically an API. Now in Azure also offers an API management, right? So how I'm going to map it, how exactly it works. So you need to understand how my Azure API management front ends my the actual API server, how it is going to provide a security and all. I have a .NET application, right? So how that my .NET application is going to containerize. Now, containerization is again of multiple types. So I was actually reading a very wonderful book. Let me open for you. Basically, I was reading this book, and this book I would recommend a lot other people to also go through, and it's quite an interesting book. So again, there was one very beautifully written section, right? Let me, yes. So let me zoom it a little more. And so if you have a monolithic or n-tier application, right? So what are the most recommended options, which is like web apps? Uh, Azure Kubernetes service is not preferred for monolithic or n-tier application. Now you can use web app for container as well. You can use virtual machine, but that is something which we are trying to get rid of, right? So you can have some Azure batches and API management as well. Now when you're having an microservices architecture or application, that is where Azure Spring Cloud, you can use Kubernetes services, Azure functions, and API management. right? So this part is need to be understood very clearly, and we need to also make sure that we understand what kind of application we have and how do we go. So I'll go little deep dive for my both of my rights. Now let me quickly go to my presentation. So what we got is what kind of application. So I'm sure you have multiple of articles and everything to give you an insight. What is an monolithic application? What is microservices and blah blah stuff, right? So you can go everywhere, and I'm just going to cut to the chase, and it is just to make it simple. And correct me if I'm wrong, right? When I talk about a monolithic application, basically it's my full length application called, maybe it is being used for banking or something like that. So it has all the services inside the same. Of course, maybe you can have two services for high availability using spread across both, and the architecture would be like you have a load balancer, right? So you have an LB here. So let me rub this. So you have an LB here, and then you have two web services, right? And then you have an again you can have an LB again. So basically you talk to an LB again, and that LB is talking to your app services, app layer, right, where all your logic sits. And again you have again you will have more like a cluster IP for the database, and you have it. This is more like a monolithic application. Now, so this is what my monolithic application looks like. Now, when we talk about microservices, the same website or the same services are broke down into small containers, right? So you have multiple containers inside that. Now this container again can be in a similar format with an LB, one container, two containers. But again, these containers are handled separately. Whereas in monolithic, for example, just an example, right? You have a single page for registration. You have the same for your, if you want to view something, okay? You have a single page to transaction. Now, suppose a banking company suddenly give a very good offer that you register and I will give you XYZ gift like movie tickets, I'll give you free credit cards and some extra offers. So suddenly you see a surge in the registration. What happens in monolithic? It start hitting you, start hitting you, start hitting you. My overall website get highly utilized, right? Uh, the containers and everything. I divide just this registration into one container set. Basically, I have one registration here, and this particular registration is scalable, right? So if the utilization goes up for my this registration, I scale up to more containers, right? I scale up to more containers. Not overall application I'm going to scale. You're getting the point, right? So I just scale the registration. Now, you say that, Anupam, I have a registration, but in previous case, everything were linked in a single page, everything were connected. How do we connect now in the case of this modern, you know, microservices application? And answer to that is API. So we start using API services. Now, with this page, they will have their own databases. Okay, registration will have its own. Suppose we have transaction. So transaction will have its own database. Now, if registration is being done for that particular new account, let's get an entry. But I need to also make sure that it gets updated to other database, because end of the day, after registration, user wants to do some kind of a transaction. How does that happen? Right. So my case was user create a new account, transfer some money. What happens? What happens is let me change a little bit of color. So basically what happens is user registers it, the registration is done, and it's get updated to the database. Now this particular database also need to get populated or certain component on your transaction database. This will also start calling the API for the transaction database. So there will be a separate set of services, I would say separate services for transaction, I would say container, which will be an API, and who will be using the same databases. Now, when this registration need to talk, it do a REST call to this containers. And that is going to in turn make those changes to a database. Let me clean everything for you guys and let me explain. Okay. Let me clean everything. Or home, undo. Okay. Let me do one thing. Add one more slide. Okay. Now I have draw pen. This is for registration. This is for transaction. So transaction. For this, we have a DB. For this, we have a DB. Now let me choose some different, maybe I think that should be fine. Now even the transaction will have another services called TRA API, right? T transaction API. Now this transaction API also connect to this. Now what is the purpose of transaction? Maybe this particular one is my web service, because I want to see what all transactions I have done on that, right? So what I do is, this is my transaction web. So I can definitely mention this as my transaction web. This is web component, and when you go to your website, you can see that how much transaction has been done, and its job is to read the data from here and give you that transaction has been done, right? Now this registration, what it does is, let me take one black. So what this transaction registration does is, it create your user profile when you are doing the registration. It also talk through this API and make sure there is an updated information on the transaction. So it goes through an API. So the API need to be internally exposed here to talk. Now this internal exposure has its own control. It's completely based on how API managements are being done, what is the control, what is the authentication and authorization method you have put, about the APIs to have that control, but it is a complete internal transaction which is happening. Now, there are APIs that can be even exposed externally, right? So, this can also be internal, this can also be exposed to your internet. So this can also be exposed to an internet, and it is mostly with the party vendors or some vendor you have, and you want to make sure that uh, my a single transaction of anything is happening over internet, right? So maybe your shopping cart website, you expose that my transaction can be seen or viewed, or maybe you have to make a transaction. It's not using a transaction but a payment API, right? So suppose I'm using a payment API. Sorry. I'm using a payment API. So this need to be done using a payment API. So that is how we handle such kind of a request. And it is very important not only to expose. And you do not need a website in many of the cases, okay? Even this web services may take a call to a REST API, and you control your REST API with any kind of a transaction what is happening. So as I was saying, first I'm trying to understand a holistic view of how the web services are there. I'm trying to make one web services as a demo. I'm going to talk about that more. The second part of it is talking more about how my cloud services get integrated, right? So what should I basically use on the cloud? That is what I'm trying to do here. Both the courses, not the courses, but both the track, I'm taking it parallelly, and I will go through all these tracks with you, whatever I have learned. Now, there is a wonderful book which I just showed to you guys. You can definitely download from the internet, which is called Developer Guide for Azure. Please have that, definitely helpful. Now, coming to what I'm doing at this point. So I'm creating a core services for a logistic company, and trust me, I have got this basically idea from ChatGPT itself, that give me how a logistic company work. But I'm not going to make a very complex model, a full-fledged model of it. But there is one service called transport, right? So I'm going to work on how this transport model works, right? I'm going to also make, there is something called custom clearance, transport, and then I'm going to make sure that there is an order fulfillment also happening. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to make my transport database, then custom clearance, and order fulfillment database basically. And I think it might require this as well. So I'm going to create multiple databases, create relationship with them, and trying to talk to each of them as a web or as a API too. Now I have to make multiple databases. I have already made my transport database, but I'm yet to make the other databases. So let me quickly go to my databases and show to you how does it look like. So databases I have made, but I think the web services are, I'm still yet to make it. Okay, why are you playing with me? Right. So this is my DB server. This is a different application which I was playing. Now this is the transport DB, and under this transport DB, I have what I have done is I made a database. Inside that you will have tables. So we have a warehouse. Sorry, this is a warehouse. This is my transport DB. Oh, so sorry. Let's select 1000 rows. So you can see that I have only two entries, which is for my uh, Dubai to Abu Dhabi and Dubai to Alain. I have made one entry, and I have also made a website for it. Let me show you that as well. Right, so we have one website which I'm making it. This is what it is, and I'm going to change it to transport.org, and let's run this. You click on transport, so you can see what database entries I have done. It is the exact same one, and you can even add a new data. Suppose I am making data entry. Let me quickly check what I had. One, let's make it two. Now this is called um, Dubai to Oman, right? Now, okay, mode is truck Dubai to Oman. Cost will be 2000 dirhams and distance will be, suppose, 500 kilometers, just in case. Submit. Let's go back and see. I'm sorry. Yeah. So now you can see that there is already a database entry for this, right? So to truck this. So at this point of time, I started making an entry for my transport detail, at what all transport option I have, and then eventually I will have the second part of it, which is so called my option to basically get the custom details, as I shown before, right? So like this is an international travel where okay, I think I did something wrong here. mm, there is something wrong in the code. Okay, I'll fix it. So I'll get that fixed. But the what we need to understand that we have to make multiple database, multiple table, and they have their own functions. Custom rules, custom definitions, and custom policies will be different and handled by a separate team. My transport cost, my transport related details are going to be handled by a separate team. So these are completely two different piece of things, right? Now, that being said, I am also working to create an API on top of it, which I'll be creating eventually and will be publishing it. For now, I think this is what it is. We'll connect again by next week and see what I have progressed, what I have done, and just to add, like, just to give you a fun part of it, right? So I can even publish this my particular application directly in a Docker also, and I have defined what image need to be used and everything. You can have your customized image. So I have at this point my local Docker. Okay, so you can see my transport.org is running, and I can actually see my services from the Docker itself. So once the services are well fledged running, let my page loads. So you can see this is basically coming from a Docker container, 23774. Sorry, 32774, my bad. So that is something which I'm getting it from this particular one, and it is completely run by my container makes sure that all these information are validated and it is running, and you can define all these container types and everything. Now that being said, I would say that's it for today. I think I'll keep you updated when this website looks more mature, and also when this website has an API integration also. These are the two things. And then we will try to move it to the cloud. We'll try to make it scaled. We'll see how can we scale it, how can we bring in more and more inputs. That's it, guys. Thank you for watching for this week. We'll connect again next week and see what we have done and what we need to do.